You've probably seen it all over social media, right? Rosemary oil for hair growth, it is absolutely everywhere. But what's the real story? Is there any actual science to back it up? Well, today we're going to dig in and see if this ancient remedy can really go toe-to-toe with modern FDA-approved treatments. Okay, let's be real. We've all had that moment of panic. You look at your hairbrush or down at the shower drain, and it just seems like there's way more hair there than usual. And that one question immediately pops into your head. Wait, am I losing my hair? So first things first, let's get something straight. There's a huge difference between just shedding hair and actual hair loss. Look, losing 50 to 100 hairs a day, totally, completely normal. That's just your hair's natural life cycle. Real hair loss, the clinical kind, is when the hair follicle itself starts to shrink or get damaged, so the hair that falls out isn't being replaced by a new, healthy one. To really figure out what might work, you've got to understand why it's happening in the first place. So let's get into the biology behind the most common kind of hair loss. We're talking about something called androgenetic alopecia. You probably know it as male or female pattern hair loss, and it is incredibly common. We're talking over 50 million men and 30 million women just in the US. The cause? It's a one-two punch of genetics. Yep, you can thank your family tree for this one, and certain hormones. So what's actually going on inside your body? Well, think of it like a chain reaction. It all starts with testosterone. Then an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase shows up and converts that testosterone into something way more potent, dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. Now, if you're genetically prone to hair loss, this DHT latches onto your hair follicles and, over time, causes them to shrink. This whole process is called miniaturization, and it's the real culprit here. The follicle just keeps producing thinner and weaker hairs until, eventually, it just gives up. And this miniaturization process is what leads to those super recognizable patterns. For guys, you know the look. It's often that receding hairline, maybe some thinning at the crown. For women, it tends to look a little different, usually more of a widening part and thinning all over the top of the scalp, but the hairline itself often stays put. So, since this is so incredibly common, what's the conventional medical approach? Let's take a look at the established, FDA-approved treatments. These are kind of the scientific benchmark that everything else gets measured against. Believe it or not, there are really only two. The first is an oral pill called finasteride, which you might know by the brand name Propecia. The second is a topical treatment called minoxidil, which pretty much everyone knows as Rogaine. In the medical world, these two are the gold standard, and they work in totally different ways. Finasteride goes right to the source. It blocks that 5-alpha reductase enzyme, which means your body produces less of that follicle-shrinking DHT. Simple. Minoxidil, on the other hand, is a bit more of a mystery, but the leading theory is that it works by improving blood flow to the follicles, waking them up and pushing them back into a growth phase. But, and this is a big one for a lot of people, it's really important to know that finasteride can have some sexual side effects for a small number of users. That's a serious consideration. And that brings us to the real star of the show today. The search for more natural options, plus those concerns about side effects, has created the perfect storm for an alternative to go viral: rosemary oil. You know, this stuff is not new, not by a long shot. Its history is wild. We're talking ancient Egyptians using it in perfumes, the Greeks calling it a sacred flower, and people even using it as a disinfectant during the plague. Its recent fame for hair is just the latest chapter in a very, very long story. Of course, with a history like that, modern scientists had to take a look. And it turns out there's something to it. Research has confirmed that rosemary is loaded with compounds that are anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antimicrobial. Basically, all things that are fantastic for creating a healthy scalp. Okay, so it has an amazing history, and we know it has properties that are great for the scalp. But let's cut to the chase. What is the actual hard evidence that it can treat hair loss? Right? This is the million-dollar question. Can a simple, natural plant oil really hold its own against an FDA-approved medication like minoxidil? Well, to answer that, we need to look at this really important study from 2015. It was a direct, head-to-head showdown. Researchers took 100 men with this type of hair loss and split them into two groups. For a full 6 months, one group used rosemary oil, and the other group used 2% minoxidil. This is exactly the kind of comparison you want to see to find out what's really working. And the results? Honestly, they were stunning. After 6 months, both groups had a significant increase in their hair count. But here's the kicker. There was no meaningful difference between the two groups. The data is right there. Rosemary oil performed just as well as the 2% minoxidil. No joke. The study's own conclusion says it all. The researchers wrote, flat out, no significant difference was found between the study groups regarding hair count. So what does that actually mean? It means in this trial, the simple plant oil was just as effective for growing hair as the established medical treatment.
But wait, it actually gets even better. There was a bonus finding. A common side effect of minoxidil can be an itchy scalp. Well, the group using rosemary oil reported significantly less itching. So this suggests it wasn't just as effective, it was also easier to tolerate.
Now, of course, rosemary isn't the only game in town when it comes to natural remedies. You've probably heard about others, like saw palmetto or pumpkin seed oil. And there's some interesting thinking about how they might work. But the key difference here is the evidence. For these other options, the data's just really limited right now compared to that direct clinical trial we have for rosemary. Okay, so after digging into the science, the standard treatments, and the really promising evidence for rosemary oil, what are you supposed to do with all this information? Let's talk takeaways. First up, and this is non-negotiable, go talk to a doctor or a dermatologist. Get a proper diagnosis because not all hair loss is the same. Once you know what's going on, you can look at all your options, conventional, natural, maybe even a mix of both. But look, no matter what you choose, you have got to be patient. That 2015 study showed that real results take at least 6 months to show up. And finally, just remember, while the rosemary oil evidence is super exciting, it is still just one major study. More research is always a good thing. So it really leaves you with this one kind of amazing thought. This study suggests that a really effective, well-tolerated treatment for one of our biggest cosmetic concerns might not come from some high-tech lab, but from a simple plant that's been around for thousands of years. Could a powerful answer to hair loss have been hiding in our gardens this whole time? Thanks for tuning in.